Said's this book by Said was Abhishek's suggestions. The readings, as you can imagine, were drawn up through very intensive and constant communication between the two of us over a month or so, right? Yeah, certainly more. So he sent me a round of suggestions, and I said, "What if we were to include?" And we come from different backgrounds, also. He's from literature. I'm by training. I'm a historian who dabbles a little bit with social anthropology, but that's about it. My training is in history. So we were like, "What about this?" and not about that. But with this particular book of Said, we never had any quarrels because it's a sequel to Orientalism, which we are all, I think in some way or the other, we are familiar with. And what I will do is to, give certain arguments and certain makes in the introduction that I found extremely suggestive and very relevant. Since we haven't given the introduction as a part of the reading, I think I'll start with that. Said's point, as you know, in Orientalism was about the arbitrariness of dividing interconnected worlds into the Orient and the Occident. So it's not as if he was saying that there is an Orient which, through better knowledge, through better, how do you say, through better nearness, we will get to know. What he was questioning was this very idea that there is an Orient and there is an Occident. He was saying that this division of the world itself is completely arbitrary and unilateral. That was his point, according to me, one of his most important points in Orientalism. In this book, what he's saying, as he says, since it comes as a sequel to Orientalism, and he had also learned from the critiques, the criticisms, and the other questions that had been raised about Orientalism, he says that in Orientalism, the part that I had not emphasized, because his sort of said is, read the chapter on Jane Austen. You have to read the chapter on Jane Austen. Saying that they are marked by social attitudes that, take imperialism not just as for granted, but as natural, as something natural. Of course, what else do you do with these people? So that's why I say pay attention to these novels. Okay, think of Great Expectations, Australia, not India. The ex-convict is, the ex-convict can be, let's say, reconfigured as long as he does not come into the social space of England. As long as he remains in Australia, it's fine. So these are the things he is pointing in a very subtle, for me, and extremely suggestive way. So what is his point? That something that we often abstract, elevate as something detached from life, something pure, something aesthetic. You can even call it spiritual in this sense, the secular spiritual, if we could say that, is actually permeated by relations of power, because they are reflections of social attitudes, social conditioning, and we have to be aware of that. So a lot of this course, you will know, we'll read Talal Asad, he's speaking constantly of genealogies. Why do we look into genealogies? And for me, something I always ask whenever I'm asked to speak, I think for me, the moot question is why first? Why do we learn what we learn? Right? It's a political act. There's no doubt about it. Why do certain themes interest us and not the others? That's one part. That's maybe a little more easy. It's easier to answer than the second part, which is how do we learn what we learn? And here we are speaking about our own prejudice, our own presumption, about our own assumptions, which we never, think, about to, let's say, let's wait. And that's why I said, for me, it's very important that we rethink our own assumptions, our own presumptions, so that we can relate in a way different, in the social world, with the people we communicate, the way we understand, we can say, we have a very noble heart. We've all worked on, I was influenced by supporting studies, so you go into and study a very heterodox, marginal, group. Actually, that work came out much later than the Divine Affairs, but that was my first work, and it's just let's say irony of fate that Professor Grewal said, okay, you looked at a very marginal group, why don't you look at the center? And that's why I moved to Puri and Jagannath, because I had actually looked at a very marginal radical group that had a complicated relationship with the Gulf of Jagannath. So you start with that. But something, again, I mentioned everywhere. When I was going for my first fieldwork, I had no idea. I moved from MA to direct PhD. Partha Chatterjee stops me. I was a fellow at the Center for Study in Social Sciences. So what makes you think that someone born and raised in Kolkata in a very upper middle class family, a child of academic parents, that you go to these remote parts of Orissa, you spend some time with these people, you observe their rituals and whatever else they do, you speak to them, and you have learned it all. That you will be able to comprehend, what their life worlds are about. I did not get the full meaning. I was 20 something then. I did not get the full meaning. I was a little daunted. I said, why is Pathoda, doing this to me just before I'm going off to Orissa? Now So that's their point. As I said, it's kind of related. Then we would not, would set such great store on being modern, on being advanced. We call it advanced, and you hear it in Mexico also constantly. There's this urge of, we are not too well off. It's changing, I mean, not amongst our two students, but we are better off than women in India. That was the idea. You've done your PhD in India, being a woman. And I would say, yes, not just that. I'm a second daughter, and my parents still decided to call me Ishita, and I use the spelling, not which is so the one which means one who's been wished for. That comes from icha, wish, to wish, not the other ish, that comes from. So there were all these stereotypes. So to come back to Said's point, these are reflections of social attitudes that we forget to question ourselves. So the great challenge for everyone, not going to happen. But at least if we can try, it might make a tiny bit of difference. The great challenge, therefore, if we insist on overlaps, if we insist on interconnections, if we insist on mutual dependence, what we can do is try and not create this us-them difference. It's an extremely difficult task. Extremely difficult task. But the moment you do not construct these frontiers, if we think twice before saying that they are very different from us, and ask ourselves, why are they very different? And I'll give you one example. In my family also, not now, thankfully they're changing, not my immediate family, but there are relatives, but they are, who they are. Muslims are very different. So the moment you stop one of them and say, but how are they different? Why are they different? Because you'll see that there are almost all of us have friends, who belong to other faiths, right? They'll say, but they are different from the ones we are speaking of. And so I said, so what your basis then is, the basis for all your prejudice then is, about people you do not know, right? When the people you know do not at all correspond to what you think of this day. Right? So these are our tasks. Of course, you cannot go out in the street. Of course, you cannot, march against, because polemics and this kind of let's say strident action only generates greater reaction. There is no common ground for dialogue. So you never lose this common ground. That's the great challenge. And for us, as I said, if we try and not create this us-them difference, which is why for culture, he's also speaking of culture in a very different way. Feminist anthropologists have said, Leela Abu, whom I like a lot, she said the same thing. What happens, when we think of ourselves as half and half, right? As Hafiz. She's speaking out of her own experience because of her mixed, but she's saying that's not the point. If we think that we are constituted by this us and them, then we do not, this us-them falls through some level. And we relate to this them. What is the problem with ideologies? So always it has a tremendous normative baggage. And what Said is showing here is precisely this. Novels, culture, something we think of as pure, as abstract, it's got nothing. This has this, underlying normative baggage. That is what a reflection of social attitudes. Things we take for granted as natural. And Uday Mehta, which of course he hadn't suggested, but I insisted that Uday Mehta has to be included. Again, years ago, he did a brilliant job of showing precisely the exclusionary strategies of, the universal liberal theorists, which we'll discuss in the second section. But this is what Said is doing. So he's picking on something which is taken to be, right, on the surface, as something completely distinct from politics, from power, from, So he's showing that culture itself is constituted by relations of power, right? And it's, you cannot get away. And there's a lot of politics in culture, right? And the other point then, if you think of like what constitutes tradition and culture now, religion comes in there. It's ideas of civilization and tradition. Tradition. We haven't included it in our readings. I've written a lot on the idea of the authentic. Why have I moved to histories of food? Because histories of food tell us also in a different way that the world has always been completely mixed, right? Completely interconnected, completely, all these overlaps. As someone, again, working on food says, think of Italian food without tomatoes. I mean, this is someone from the New World. So I say, think of Indian, Bengali food without potatoes, or as Assamese food without potatoes. Where did they come from, right? So the history of food will tell you that, this hybridity, this idea of diasporic space where there's nothing pure, there's nothing, authentic or absolutely, an entity that can be abstracted, nothing essential, trans-historical, trans-cultural. So Said is pointing to it in a very different way. We'll see it again and again in Talal Asad. He's saying, let's look at the genealogies. And as I said, they are just indicating as to how we should think and reflect on our own assumptions before we think, before we pronounce, before we act. So I'll stop there for the moment. I want your reactions, not just to what I've said. I have not touched the chapter we've given yet. So, yes, you wanted to say something, right?
Yes, I want to say two things. First of all, while you mentioned Legault, she also talks about there is a certain amount of romanticism we all use.
Yes.
I would like you to, if you can talk a bit more about.
Sorry, take the microphone so that it can be. Sorry. If you could just pass it amongst each other so that it can be recorded. Yeah. Sorry. And introduce yourself. Just give your name. Yeah.
Since you mentioned Legault, so there is a certain amount of romanticism, she says, that works when we talk about, cultures and hegemonies of culture. So I'd really like if you talk about that romanticism part as well, that how we tend to romanticize and, all of us do. And in this regard, I would also like to talk about a personal experience, if you guys don't mind. In Bengali, there's a song written by Nazrul, Shukno Patan by some of you might have heard about it, right? So first I got to know that there is a very similar song in a Balkan region. And I was devastated actually, because all my life I thought it was a song by Nazrul, written by Nazrul, and sang by him and sang by all of us. My identity was related to it to some extent. And then I realized that there are at least 6 to 7 countries in Balkan region who all claim that it's their own song. And in one part of Balkan region it's about war, in one part it's about love. I mean, different things, but it's the same song, right? And it's also important that how migration played a huge part of it. And we tend to forget about, especially hippies, right? That how they moved from, from the Silk Road and, further in the world. So this is one of my personal self-reflection, that part, that really hurt me and made me think about the, I mean, second time about the work I am doing, you know. So in spite of looking at music and people and that murky areas, right, and romanticizing about it, being the marginalized and stuff, uh, I still couldn't take that this song was not about Nazrul at all. And this is one personal experience.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we have more comments? Or I see? Yeah. Yes, yes, we got these.
Vibha here. I think the centrality over here is linked with cognition. So ideas, interests have always been mobile, and power relations have changed over time. The central question is, going back to what you said, is how do we know the world? It's linked with our cognitive abilities. So certain basic concepts will always be mobile or be present in all cultural traditions. Because it's part of our human cognition itself, how we relate and know the world. So that's where the learning and unlearning has to go together. To be able to grasp the world in the concepts or the ways of knowing the world of the others, as Tim Ingold and others anthropologists have said, first means learning the ways of doing the things the way the others do it. That is where colonialism was a kind of a break, because there the hegemonic power assumed they only knew how to know the world. Other categories of thought did not have the power balance to be having the ability to know the world. So colonialism, more than just economic imperialism or political imperialism, was a form of hegemonic way of knowing the world.
Absolutely. Which is why they call it the coloniality of power.
Yes, yes.
Which is coming from
I mean,
yeah.
we cannot forget the fact that before colonialism happened, we were always trading with ideas and not just materials.
Yes.
Isn't that right? East India Company came, it was trading for a number of centuries before British power established its colonial power over India, or let's say rest of the world. So ideas have always traveled.
Yes.
That's a fact that we can't.
Black
So we have
pepper.
the Silk Route, we have the inland routes, we have the port trading routes. We've always traveled. So if you look at archaeology, it tells us the history of traveling. But it's colonial transition which has given an elevation to what is coloniality.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Now I was going to say that pepper, the Romans came here. We know of the European companies, they all came here for pepper. As you know, they all went first right in the Portuguese land up in the Malabar coast. It was black pepper, which they called black gold. And the interesting thing, and which is why I'm fascinated by the history of food, when Columbus goes he thinks he's going towards India, but he ends up in America. He's so obdurate. He's insisting that the chili seeds that is brought back from there are actually the black peppercorns, the seeds of the black peppercorns. And the other interesting thing that happens is, if you look at Indian food, the garam masala that we now have, sometimes they include the red chili thing, which wasn't there. The heat that was generated earlier in Indian food was through black pepper. So now, after the mixtures, now you will use red chilies, including in some mixtures of the garam masala, which is very, very interesting. But anyway, this is, as I said, an aside connected to my fascination with the history of food. But it is true, it's cognition. It is about cognition. But the point is, what is the point? Why do we want to know about the world? I think we, as concerned individuals, want to know how to move around in the world, right? It's not just, we cannot have, as I said, we cannot have theories and concepts when our students come for, the marco teorico, which is very important. I think also for doctoral thesis anyway, the theoretical, whatever, marco teorico, like the framework, the theoretical framework. I said, but professor, we want the marco theorico professor. And I said, the marco teorico has to emerge from your own material. Because if you've already decided on the theoretical framework and then go and see whether it works or doesn't work, it's pointless. It's reductive and it makes no sense. And why are you interested in learning something when you don't really have good questions? Like it's something within you that moves you to find out more about this thing or more about that. But to come back, yes, thank you. To come back to Said again. this idea of culture, which you mentioned, culture one is romanticized, terribly romanticized, but not just that. What is he saying? He's saying culture, if we think of it, that's why he's giving, as I said, novel as the supreme example of something elevated that transcends, as I said, the ordinary social world. Because think of it, the woman reading the novel and all that, there have been brilliant studies on that. But when you're as if you are disconnected, right? When we are reading, even when we read, let's say, Emma or Pride and Prejudice, which we think it's a different world, and he is pointing to look at that figure, lurking in the background of Jane Austen's tea party. Where's the tea coming from? Where's the the tablecloth that's coming from? And how are there are all these references? There are all these references which are meant to be absolutely in passing, have no importance whatsoever. He's saying no, they are so very important, because precisely that's showing how Jane Austen thought and felt, lived in a world where this entire idea of colonialism was so natural, like Indians or whoever else in the colonies are there to serve. So that's one. The other thing, as I said, when he's pointing to culture, and it's come back in different ways. He's saying culture, which we all know. I haven't used the word identity, but just ask them what is that, right? So culture is saying is a great source of combative identity. It is through culture that we create this, us them difference. Anyway, think of nations, think of the discourse of nationalism. On what does, the idea of one nation as distinct from other, what does it mean itself for, right? Indianness. In Mexico, they call it Mexicanidad, right? So what is this Indianness? What is this Mexicanidad? Again, the idea of something which we cannot quite, describe clearly, but this something, a sense, a sensibility, an essence ingrained in us that makes us different. So nations, as imagined communities, are constantly creating and what? Not just creating, they're performing this cultural difference with other nations. And Saurav and I have talked about this, and we're questioning nationalism constantly. What does it mean for us to stay, I don't, but Saurav does, stay up nights watching, the Indian cricket team play and feeling bad when they lose, right? So we are aware of it, because why? Why are these ideas important? These ideas are important, identity in any form, or because it's an insecure world. Modern man, as you know, modern man is meant to be an, someone, an individuated individual who stands on his own with no bonds whatsoever. We'll go into those areas, but that's the idea, right? But that obviously hasn't worked, because we need some kind of bonding. We've left behind, let's say, this dependence on, on the supernatural, maybe not the divine, but something that beyond our resources. That's the idea. We can control the world. That's the major change, the age of discovery and the break, which we will read with over that happens, right? So modern man, therefore, is meant to be this, as I said, individuated individual, like an atom standing on his own. Never the woman, of course, but hasn't. We need man as a social animal, as they say, also need a sense of belonging. There's a urge, and this sense of belonging. That is why we are constantly constructing, identities. We belong to this, we belong to that, we belong to this family, we belong to this, community, let's say, of Bengalis, of Punjabis, of whatever. If you see Indians abroad, and if you see others, when, if you see, for example, go to Europe, you will see that, all the Latinos, they come together. It's maybe not just the Guatemaltecan or the Ecuadorians, but, all of them put together as the Latinos. So that is where, as I said, this ideas of objectified identities, which we question, they also get recreated. And rather than just dismissing them, I think you have to ask why it is happening. Right? You can always say that these are objectified identities. That does not mean that we do not question essentialized, objectified identities. It's very, very important. We question them because when the Latinos are coming together, this sense of the Latinos is completely different from what it was before. So it cannot be ever, in that sense, transhistorical or essentialized. What does essence mean? Something given for all time to come. And that is what we have to question. And that is what on which reified ideas of culture and tradition rest. Also of nations. Think of nations that does not claim a history from time immemorial. So he's saying, therefore, culture, therefore, is a source, a tremendous source of the construction of combative identities. In Jane Austen, we the Britishers in England, so very different from, she's constantly mentioning he is going off for service in the East, right? But that what you are, right? And in different ways it's been shown how the idea of Britishness, comes into being towards the end of the 18th century, not just on account of the Napoleonic Wars. Of course, it does. It has a lot to do with Anglo-French rivalry in Europe, but also on what is happening in India, right, or in the colonies. So connected history is also in that sense. And what you said, the point about Europe and what Viva said is also very important. What European domination does is precisely give this domination a natural aura, as if nothing else would have happened to these people. Right? So as I said, to go back to the point you made, that we have not learned to think of alternatives to imperialism. We have to start there. What if imperialism had not happened? Right? That will probably make us think in ways different from the way we do. Now, although as I said, there's no going back to an innocent past. Yeah. So the point is this idea of something pure, something essential, something that you can identify. And as if you ask yourself, think of the way we relate to the idea of being Indian or Bengali in very different ways at different moments in our own lives, right? So that is the point. If you think of the historical, that these are all processes, and these are all historical, and these are molded by what is happening in and around us, it will then automatically make this essentialized notions of authentic, pure, native culture further. Yes?
This connection of the Indians being so loved by this colonial hangover, that when we have to refer to in historical terms, we normally begin to describe in terms of pre-colonial, colonial, or post-colonial. So, how do we have an alternative discourse and bring about the historical underpinnings in connection with Indian scenario? Because we are so very tend to be So that's my question. We normally tend to refer or begin to refer from this pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial times, which has become very problematic. So how do we have an alternative way of going forward?
The only alternative way is, as I said, start thinking about these possibilities, which we haven't done. There's no alternative way. As I said, the way we are now is we are thoroughly marked by actual, not just colonization, the process, as I say, of discursive colonization of the mind. We have also gone through 190 years of actual historical process of colonialism. And the other important thing, as I said, Said is saying, is how we draw upon those very objectifications and classifications. That's exactly what we are doing. Think of the idea of a classical Sanskritic tradition. When is it taking shape? When does, Hindu Dharma become Hinduism? Right? But we all believe in it. So these are the ways. I mean, there's no, as I said, for me, we have to start thinking ourselves, and maybe the way we think about the worlds we live, maybe the way we relate to others, maybe the way when we teach, we bring these up, right? So yes.
When I think about this, this combative identity, I don't need it. One thing that comes to mind also, that some identities which you don't belong to at the same time, right? So we say that we are not this to become this, right? So that cognition part plays a huge role, not becoming something as well. Yeah.
But that we do to ourselves. But if you state it again that we are not this, right? Sometimes I say it that it's very difficult for me to try and figure out the inner logic of what so and so is saying and doing. When there are open attacks on Dalits or but again you're creating a wall. That's the problem. Sometimes you are so angry. You're so desperately angry that you forget that you can actually go and try open a conversation or get into dialogue. Also because then the other side will dismiss you even before you've begun. Right? You don't know to know. I have friends in Bombay, and there's a friend from college, from my Hassan time. She said, "Oh, I know you've lived and worked in Mexico for so long, so of course you will believe in this pseudo-secular stuff." There's a friend I met, after about 15 years or maybe even more in Calcutta. So of course I knew it, You don't know India now. Yeah. Of course I knew you'd believe in the pseudo-secular stuff, right? And I told her one more. I mean, you've forgotten. I've also done history very seriously, and I also teach South Asian history. That's what I do. I've learned a lot from, that way, Mexico, the location in Mexico has opened up, vistas. The idea of how something, the colonial period is so distant, is a thing of the past. We have got over that, through the way we think about colonialism in India. There have been things, but I told her that, I'm very much, no, you live abroad and you have all these ideas and, no, I come and interact with people. I read the newspapers. I can see what's happening. I can see intolerance growing, and I'm extremely, distressed. But anyway, after 15, 20 years, you don't end up, fighting over. So, but I'm saying it's these are the stereotypes, and that's what I'm pointing to. We should not also try and create these stereotypes. Very difficult. Sometimes you are. We are all, in that sense, political agents. Sometimes you are terribly agitated. You are very, very angry, right? And yet, the moment you stop that, create a wall, it's difficult. So we are not this. Yes, for years I said I'm not an NRI. Please do not call me an NRI because I do not identify at all, right? But now I would stop before that. I said, think of the way they act and they speak, and think of the way I act and I speak, right? Before calling me an NRI. So I mean, I face it every day. As I said, this friend of mine and we were very good friends. English. She's written 3 novels. Anyway, let me not give the names because I don't think they're particularly brilliant novels. But anyway, so she says, of course, but it's teaching. I said, so in 1 second, you're dismissing my entire training in history and the fact that I continue to be involved with South Asian history. I actually teach the courses on modern and contemporary South Asia. These are the 2 core courses I have to teach to every generation of master students, right? Not important, right? Because I've lived and worked in Mexico for 22 years. Obviously, I will be this, I believe in the pseudo-secular stuff because I don't know India anymore, right? So I mean, these are things. That's what I'm saying. They all have implications for our lives here and now, and that's where we have to be alert. Right? I said, if we are alert, as I said, if people in this room, think of possibilities and alternatives for being in the world in a different way, at least a few people would, would be benefited. Sorry. So now, if we want to, I have, like as I said, pages and pages of notes that I thought are very, very important. Okay, one more thing from the introduction before we moved on to the chapter. The other thing he was saying, and people have said, Gandhi had also said that everyone can speak, this important speak, everyone can speak, but you do not have the legitimacy or the authority to be heard, right? Gandhi had said that, but even everyone else is saying, what you were saying, alternatives. What was water studies and post-colonial studies, what are they saying? That we have to, ourselves, we have to also, through our own works, try and establish these narratives. I haven't used the word. Said uses the word from the introduction. Narrative is focusing on the narrative structure of the novels that tell you so much, not just about the characters, but as I said, the social attitudes, right? And their presumptions and prejudices. Narratives, in our own narratives. Why do we work on marginal sex? No one. We have to establish the legitimacy of these histories or these narratives as equally important. What is the Bishop saying in Provincializing Europe? If we did not, because we make this hyper-real Europe, real over and over and over again. Right? So if we didn't do that, if we felt that citing a Marx or a Weber or a Hegel or a Heidegger, is important, but it's also equally important to be in conversation with a Panini, with a Patanjali, whoever, okay, with Abhinavagupta or people of our times, yeah. Because we should not fall into the trap of third world nationalism and a lot of nativism, which is happening here, which is happening in Latin America. There are people who say about these decolonials, we do not want to read those. Stop. That's not the point. Again, you stop the conversation, right? We are all decolonials, so we don't have to read all this. No, those people have had very important things to say, and you learn from them not just by learning what they said. As I said, you learn from them also by paying attention to how they said what they said, right? Which is, as I said, the chapter I gave over there, he does brilliant. Liberalism, the strategies of exclusion. We'll come to this in the next session. But so that's so if you do not give this centrality, right, in your Marco Teorico, you have to cite. You have to cite, someone from Europe, someone from the US, right? And why don't we think, as Dipesh asked, that why doesn't it occur to us that it's absurd to think that we can be in conversation with a Hegel or a Marx or a Weber? But when we try and do the same thing with Abhinavagupta, we think it's absurd because they are dead and gone, right? So why are Hegel and Marx and Weber not dead and gone? And why are these people dead and gone? So that's what I'm trying to point to. It's the very way we think and act and we know and we approach words. Right? So, sorry. Now before coming to the chapter. So coming back to the question of voice. He's saying one thing very important. In our wish to make ourselves heard, we often forget that the world is a crowded place. And that if everyone were to insist on the radical purity purity or priority of one's own voice, all we would have would be an awful din, an unending strife, and a bloody political mess. So, the priority and purity of our positions, of our voice, this us, this assertion of the us, we have to somehow, how do you say, temper it. Otherwise, as he says, we end up in an awful din where nobody actually listens to the other, and we end up in political strife, in the mess of political strife. So again, as I said, think of the danger in constructions of pure, authentic, native identities. And that is why I said, when you think of, food in the eastern part of India, do you ever think that potatoes came at a late stage from the New World? Tomato is vilayati bengal, right? In Hindi, also in Bengali, but not so much in Hindi, but in Bengali, certainly vilayati bengal, right? That was tomato. But we do not, we have naturalized it. But we can draw examples, innumerable examples from everyday words. And we have to do that. We actually have to do that to rethink very seriously what we are imputing, our own motives behind these constructions of these identities that we think they're important. And as I said, why are they important? Because they give a sense of security. Greg Calhoun had said it for nationalism, that despite all the criticisms and the critiques and the self-reflections, nations and nationalism continue to be important because they give you a sense of security in an otherwise extremely insecure world. And the same applies for any kind of identity you try and construct. But if we are aware from the beginning that we are doing this for our own need and that they are not given for time immemorial, and they are constituted of essential elements, we will deal with the world in a very different way, right? So now about the chapter comments. Right? As I can see the number of pages I still have, but it doesn't matter. I promise to be more disciplined the next time. Yes. Yes, Abhishek.
No, I'm listening.
Yes, I know you're listening. Anyone else? Okay. Yes, about this chapter. Please. I hope you have read, some of you have read, right? So, your comments on coming after what I've said so far. Viva, please. Okay. Please. It's not an exam. And I think you've guessed that there is no hierarchy here. You'll not be judged on what you say or you don't say. So yes. Yeah.
Do you think it's possible to share history?
Absolutely.
Some sizes of it,
Yeah.
Kind of manage the argument. It's not for interconnected histories, but he calls it there. He's not saying we have a sense of shared history.
Yeah.
The history is always the history of the hegemon. It's not about a shared history. So it's very interesting in this chapter. He ends on fluid boundaries, interconnected things, but he never wants to use the term called shared history.
Yes. Yes. I agree. And I do think that it is extremely important to people are speaking of global history and global sociology, as you know. But this shared experience, you're right. So it hasn't done it, but it's for us to do it.
Connections, but he doesn't say shared history. So it's the absence of shared is something which kind of intrigued me.
Absolutely. And the example that Shaloka gave, exactly, it is about shared history. Right?
It's always that.
So rather than feeling sad that this Nojrul song did not belong to you, I think you should feel, a sense of exhilaration that it belongs to so many other people.
I have one silly example about food. I don't know if you like Japanese food, so they have this something called tempura, which is like bashone bhaja, vegetables or any non-veg items. which is actually, I was reading an article in BBC, which is actually Portuguese. So Japanese didn't have tempura at all, but it has now become the face of Japanese food.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Vietnamese food is much different from the French, but they use wine. Vietnamese food. Before they never used to have wine, and the entire culinary of Vietnamese food has been associated with wine.
Think of chop suey in the US. By the way, yes, but about the chapter again, these are all related to, but yes, and a very, very, very pertinent point to be got. Thanks. See, say this in comparative literature because it came from literature. He says comparative literature highlights, dramatizes, and celebrates a certain idea of history and obscures the fundamental geographical and political reality empowering that idea. So one way indirectly of answering you is that, if we were aware of that and did not empower, because it's pointing to the idea of comparison. Same thing, in a different way, Dipesh Chakraborty is posing that when we speak of Indian history, Chinese history, Mexican history, what is history? Right? The idea of history with the capital H. And these are the problems with universals. And you will see again and again in the readings that these universals were not at all universal. They were the products of very particular, not just particular, contingent processes in very small particular parts of the globe, which were then applied universally to a lot of the world on account of actual conquest and colonization. Right? So that I think is, so the idea of shared history in that sense, yes, is very, very important. The idea of not shared, yes and no, interconnected history was made by people who work on the pre-colonial period. I mean, I'll give examples from history, sorry, because that's the, the discipline I know a bit about. So, Sanjay Subramanian, right, and the others. People who, Kumkum Chatterjee, she died, but they were working more and more on the idea of the early modern. And what were they saying? They were saying that if we think of modernity or the modern as bringing about a rupture, where does this idea come from? The idea comes from the, it's very European. Why? Because the age of discovery and the places, the lands they are going to is causing a revolution there. Why? Because the idea of the Bible, everything, like what they thought or knew about the world is changing drastically. But that does not mean that the people who already lived and existed there, they did not exist. Think of America, the idea of the Americas. And again, very good work has been done by feminist scholars, the Las Americas. If you pay attention to Spanish, Las Americas. Always a woman, always, virgin, who has to be discovered. And in Spanish, this discovered is actually uncovered. That's it. Descubierto, right? Cubrir is to cover, and descubrir is to, like uncover. So it's, but to go back to yes, Sanjay is saying that if you're speaking about the sudden expansion about the knowledge of the world or theology, that happened much before, and he's giving examples of what the universal Islamic empires. He's giving example of the Safavids and the others. It's happening much before. And he said the Mughals. Yes, and he's saying the Mughals were very aware of what, let's say, an emperor should behave, the way he should act in the world, what were his duties. So these ideas were circulating. Notions of, let's say, we haven't discussed because I'm interested in time and the end of time. Notions of the end of the world through some kind of catastrophe. It could be the pralaya, it can be anything else, right? These were also circulating. So to come back to Said's idea, although he doesn't develop it in that way, and historians have done that work, so when we speak of interconnected worlds were interconnected. And we will speak, therefore, later of cartographic imaginations, which, as I said, for me, Said's important point is not saying that there is an Orient and an Occident which can be known better and and theorized about better. He's saying it did not exist. I mean, think of us. I always tell my students, what is Far East for me? Makes no sense. Don't you see the prejudice? Yes, for you from here, yes, China, Japan are Far East. China is my neighbor. Right? What is Far East? What is Southeast? What is so? It depends. It's clear that way. Even physically, you can prove that it depends on your location that you have mapped the world in these particular terms. But we can continue to use these terms also, right?
Even in this context, the entire notion of the Northeast India is also questionable. How we see Northeast.
Yes.
If we see the Northeast as region, we are looking at Northeast from the center point of view. That's a part of it. And if we say Northeast, and then what about the Sikkim, which was included recently, a part of Northeast? And there, when we talk about region also, there's always association between those regions and a culture specificity is looked at.
Yes.
But Northeast is it's a boiling pot because everyone is claiming their own identity. There are like language differences there, culture difference, which is a problematic situation out there. Every other day, one other community or group is claiming to be different from the others.
Yeah. And that is the danger Said is pointing to. When he says that it comes back, he's saying while we have to recognize the extremely energetic potentialities of this, what we think, thought and criticism that is political and that is resistant, we also have to be aware of the, how we draw upon and reinforce these objectifications, and we ourselves construct these combative identities through culture. And that, as you know, I would run through the course all along. I mean, I'm not using the word religion, we'll come to religion, but that's the idea of constructing combative cultures out of identity. You want a break now, right?
Just one small
Yes.
doubt.
Yeah.
I find it very pertinent also. I'm just wondering, there is a huge lot of shared history of connections between Asia and Europe, which is going on for time immemorial. But then, as far as the case of American continent is concerned, the New World, Amerigo Vespucci, and all these things. So there was never, I believe, any such connectivity with the American continent with the rest of the world. Isn't it so? When you were talking about that virgin woman who is the object of the European desire, so immediately I was reminded of a Donne poem, John Donne's that very beautiful poem, which also speaks loudly about the Europeans' desire as to how they want to look at the new world. And I was also simultaneously reminded of a Shekhar Kapoor movie, wherein Elizabeth. So wherein actually Sir Walter Raleigh brings two aboriginals in the court of Elizabeth I, and they are just for the sake of showing the stranger, the exotic American aboriginal. So I'll come back to that question that I asked you. That there is always a history of connections between Europe and Asia. But as far as the case of the American continent is concerned, hasn't it really started from 15th century?
I would agree now, but I think there were earlier connections because they now claim that yes. But I would agree for the present, yes. Professionally, I would agree, but yeah. Indian silver now it's almost disappeared. But yes, this is a definite colonial connection. The silver coins are still minted in San Luis Potosi in Mexico, and most of they use a lot of canela. What's canela? Cinnamon, which still goes from Sri Lanka. So again, I think the history of food will tell us a different story. Maybe.
Also beads and ori, I don't know what the English word is.
Yes, 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 yes. And the okay, I think it's time, right? We have to finish. But I yes.
Ma'am, I come from Tripura, one of the states in the northeast region of India. When she was talking about these uprisings of demands of separate states from different parts of India, especially in the northeast. Recently, we had this big news. One of the tribal, what I would say, groups in Tripura was claiming this Tripura land. They wanted different land. I am just curious to know how this nationalism and ethnicity, when we talk about this separate states, which in some way or the other basically relates to particular groups living in, say, in a geographical region, where these ethnic groups, they feel that they are not represented, their history is not there, so they want to revive it. So in that way, we may call this as ethnic, demands, and yet, especially these tribal people, they feel that with this inflow of we Bangalis, actually we came from East Bengal, and after we came there, so almost their history was erased. So which is why they are actually claiming
Yes.
they have these demands. So when we look at this, the mainstream politicians and news media, they really, define it as a kind of small demands from some ethnic groups. So would we just, explain it away as a kind of ethnic, what I would say, ethnic demands, or is it in some way or the other related to the nationalism we are speaking about here?
It is
How
and
is
it isn't.
nationalism related with this?
See, the point is, yes, we have to ask these questions. We have to ask why they're doing what they're doing, as I was saying. And if it's very difficult to plant the idea of shared experience. And Said is saying there, to answer your question, he's saying that cultural experience, that's why I gave you a few examples. Cultural experience, if we look at it deeply, is always, radically and quintessentially hybrid in the sense of mixed and shared. He is not pushing the point about shared history. Why? Because the problem with why we speak so much of European domination, etc., etc., because in Jane Austen or anywhere else, there's a clear sense of superiority, right? So if we drop that, because it's from that you feel that certain groups feel threatened. Why are you feeling threatened? And something Bhattacharya, when I was teaching him, it just struck me. He's saying the idea of a majority and minority are states of mind. Absolutely. They are states of mind. They are not just about demographics. Of course, I would love to discuss this. I teach Indian history, and I'm sorry I couldn't bring my history of Mongolia. I wish I could circulate it so that you took a look. But it comes up, about with the demographic enumeration through all India censuses. But the point is, why is it that certain groups feel threatened at certain moments and not in others? And then on the basis of that, there are several other conditioning. And that's the idea of, we think that nation and nationalism, because nationalism, the idea of the nation as the imagined community in what we call a secular world, is almost the only politically legitimate community that we accept at a point. Now with the questions of nationalism coming, but there is a lot of coercion, because what if you do not identify or relate to the elements that that you think constitute this national culture, the idea of the nation as an imagined community. So these are the questions we have to ask. And if we can look back at these, stories of shared experience, when you're speaking of partition violence, and this has been pointed out by several scholars, we speak of the tremendous trauma, the tremendous tragedy, the almost insane violence, as if it's not something natural. But there were, for one neighbor killing another, there was another one giving shelter, right? So we're saying we have to mention both. That there is, almost unthinkable violence. There's, it's a magnitude you cannot. But there's also, many more would have lost their lives if many others hadn't, helped their neighbors. Right? So these are the things we have to. I think it's very difficult. If we say, but we were and now you are, I don't know where to start the dialogue, but these are, questions we have to ask. Share this. Yes.
Yeah, ma'am, regarding this partition violence and all, but I actually work on Kashmir conflict. So, there's this whole discourse that has been generated now regarding the Kashmiri Pandits going back to their home. And it has always created a lot of furor in the valley. And certain newspapers, I mean, most newspapers actually create a lot of fanfare regarding that. That, the Kashmiri Pandits are returning, they will stay with their Muslim neighbors for a few days and come back and things like that, Now, the idea is, we are talking about shared history, and the idea is that they have a shared history, and they had a shared history, and they should have more of that shared history. But the point is, and this particular instances of, particular instances of social harmony is highlighted while a decade-long oppression and almost violent eviction of the Kashmiri Pandits and then, put under the carpet, because that is not, that is not very amenable to our national narrative of a joint family, a federal union. So, when we are talking about nationalism giving security, then the problem lies that other people feel insecure.
Exactly.
And essentially the minority. But the minority also differ. Like, who is a minority where?
That is the question I'm asking. Why is it that at particular moments, groups which we otherwise think are dominant, why do they think they're a minority?
And the other thing is, projecting a certain instance of social harmony, as you pointed out, that some other neighbors are giving shelter, and neglecting a larger history of social violence is a little problematic. I think Gyan Prakash does a lot of.
Gyan Pandey.
Talks a lot about in this.
Violence is the key idea of routine violence. And we'll speak about our latent, let's say, why is it that everyone in Bengal, they would, or most people, years ago, people started saying, we are secular, but it's latent in us. The way the idea of the partition plays out. And it's almost common sense to point to the Muslims as the traitors. The way why, right? So there's no point in saying we are secular. That's, as you know, they draw this idea of, secular from.
Question of comparative disadvantage and, comparative privilege of getting heard. Like, who's getting heard? Like, the Kashmiri Muslim story is getting heard, while the Pandit story was suppressed for a very long time. Before Pandita came out with this book, Amun Blood Clots, and then everybody started talking about it. So I think, this whole idea.
But I think we also have to think about, how they related to the world when they were, why this.
Violence.
Why this violence against them, right?
All this, I was also thinking about assertion of identity, and identity has seen a kind of essence and assertion related to it. But Side in his essay says that identity is not about innocence. So there is again contradiction in what is written and then what we experience.
So that's the point I'm making. There's nothing essential about any identity that you form. There are several elements that constitute identity. And it depends on when we are giving priority to what. And if we look back upon those histories, reflect on that, from there you can start a dialogue saying that this was not our most important identity. I'll give you another example. There's someone from Tripura. I was telling Viva yesterday that in college, again, in the high secondary stage, the actually someone from the Tripura Raj family, meaning she was the princess, right? Her father was the Maharaja. She came to study with us. Of course, you couldn't make out except for one diamond nose ring. There was nothing, in those days, 79 she could wear jeans and Adidas t-shirt she had gone. And she said she's a Dev Burman, and we started speaking to her in Bangla, and we said, why don't you know Bangla? She'd grown up in Shillong, gone to Shillong. She said, no, but we are from Tripura. And just think, all of us, 15, 16 years old. But if you are related to Sachin Dev Burman and Rahul Dev Burman, then you must be a Bengali. And she said, no, we are from Tripura, like the original family of Tripura. And all of us said, no, you're a Bengali, and why don't you know Bangla? But she was not. She was, she was saying that the other, So,
This question, I would say this is not a problem for Tripura. Even in Manipur, Nagaland, whatever Northeast you will find this problem. The small communities are demanding for a separate state. Even in Boro, people of Assam, they are also demanding, want to divide Assam people. So this type of problem is going on.
so we have to decide on the
So
dangers of
my
nationalism.
question is,
Yeah.
what is the fate of this Indianness? What is the fate of this?
We don't know. India has held together districts for several centuries.
Because in
We don't know.
northeastern region, in some places, probably in Meghalaya, the 15 years back, the people used to say like this, by God we are Christians. And unfortunately, we are Indians.
It's like this Parsi by birth, Indians by accident.
Yeah.
That's what they
Yeah.
say.
So, what is the fate of this Indians?
But those are the questions we have to ask. Who thinks that he or she belongs and in what way?
But everybody is an Indian by accident. I mean, the formation of the nation state was an accident. Maybe a longer accident.
But India held together somehow, right? Not India that is Bharat. And there's people work on pilgrimage networks. Vishnu Mahapatra wrote an article years ago about, there was some sense of, and we will speak of cartographies and political maps precisely, that why is it that the four dhams of Vishnu are located at roughly the four, the corners of India. And the people who did very few, but the ones who did, what kind of sacred geography did they work with, and what kind of, let's say, the idea of some belonging, and where did they belong? So we have to ask all these questions. Art historians of ancient India are saying that if sex was taboo in India, people wouldn't have put those statues on temples. It was very much a part of everyday life, and if you are showing that, there's nothing wrong. But I'll give you one example. Khajuraho, as you know, it's an extremely but incredibly gorgeous temple, right? One panel on the Kama Sutra thing. If you see the guides, Indian guides, taking foreign tourists, because that's what they want you to look for, they'll take you straight to that one. Okay? And you've seen Khajuraho.
Joseph Mossad of Colombia has a wonderful book on this, what he calls the desiring Arab, right?
Yeah.
About issues of sexuality in the Arab world. And he argues that the Westerners, they tried to project the other what they were not.
Yes.
During the liberating moment of sexuality and LGBT issues and all of that, they said that the sex was taboo in India. And it was the other way around that other time. It was a very interesting argument to makes.
Thank you very much. I think we have to stop, but I had, as I said, I didn't even reach my notes for the chapter, but maybe I can very briefly recollect in like 5 minutes in the next session, because Uday Mehta, I know him personally too, but I've just loved his work, and we always teach this chapter or the next, and so yeah. So I hope you speak some more in the next one. Yes. Were there other comments or observations? So thank you very much.